All right. Welcome, everybody, to another Wrench Factor podcast where we have amazing discussions and look what really drives modern manufacturing and maintenance. I am your co-host, or I guess drop-in host for this event. I'm Jake Hall, the Manufacturing Millennial. And today we have a very special guest. We have Rush LaSelle. He's the CEO of Fathom Manufacturing. And Rush, before we dive into the entire, background of what you're doing, just a couple quick highlights about what you've done. You've been in the industry for 30 years now. You've worked with companies you worked at companies like Fanuc, Jabil, AddUp, 3D Tech. You're now the CEO of Fathom Manufacturing as well. Rush, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Jake. One thing I haven't done, and on behalf of all of us humans, I congratulate you on your victory in boxing a humanoid a few weeks ago, and glad that you made it through that, and congrats on the victory.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I can't add that to my resume. But yeah, Jake, I've been a very, very fortunate guy. I got out of college a long time ago and got into robotics. And that was amazing. First decade of my, I guess, 3-decade career now. And then you mentioned Jabil. Jabil was an amazing opportunity to see what really global manufacturing looked like. Huge volumes, operationally excellent, and met a lot of amazing folks there. And then I'd say the last third of my journey here, Jake, has been doing a lot of advanced manufacturing. It really started out with 3D printing, working a lot with companies like HP, and I think I felt kind of early day pioneer in some of the cool things that they were doing and we were doing. And then most recently, I'm here with Fathom Manufacturing, and I think we're doing a lot of really amazing things trying to help manufacturers get product to market. And so really excited to chat with you again.
Yeah, well, we have a lot to cover in like this 15-minute squeeze in. We're talking about today introducing high-value products on the manufacturing floor, and that's something that Fathom does really well. But before we dive into, I guess, the products of the industry, I want to dive into the processes. You've been in the industry for 30 years. You've helped manufacturers either through robotics or automation and assembly or additive manufacturing. You've helped companies drive a lot of new processes in manufacturing. So 30 years of experience. What has been the most interesting new processes, new technologies you have seen come to the production floor?
Yeah, it's such 15 minutes isn't enough, really isn't. But I think Jake, it is in fact just the process in general. Digitization. If you go back to the 90s here in the U.S., it was a very serial thing, manufacturing, trying to get somebody to get an idea, whether it was at Ford, 3M, and then make it a reality. But that was predominantly done within their four walls. Fast forward and you start seeing more ERP, you see CAD systems, and the significance of CAD and the processes that surrounded digitizing design. Now you can move it all over the place. Didn't have to stay within those four walls in Minnesota. And, so I think in the 90s, that's really what started to change, how the processes look today. And then you start looking at how you manage new product introduction. And then you start thinking about, for friends in the medical industry or defense, how do you make that secure with all these bits and bytes flying all over the place? And where we land today is this really amazingly fast new product introduction cycle. And it takes advantage of all those things. CAD systems, security, and then really how are you doing it at iteration, at the speed of humanoid robotics. So there's a lot going on, but I think we're really at this golden age of how those two markets, the CAD systems, everything you saw come out of Silicon Valley and our dear old manufacturing community getting together and going real fast.
And I think you hit the nail on the head with that, where the head on the nail. Wow. The head on the nail with that one. When we're talking about the introduction of new product cycles, and for the audience that's not aware, can you guys give a quick 60-second overview of what Fathom does and how that's going to tie into what we're talking about on introduction of new products?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for that. So, Fathom is, we've got 7 sites here in the U.S. and about 500 folks. And really what we're charged with doing is we don't do really high volume manufacturing like the folks over at Jabil. What we really focus on is whether it's old line manufacturing companies who maybe have lost some of their engineering experience, or maybe some of the labs that they historically had done some prototyping, or some of these really exciting new startups coming out of Silicon Valley. I just mentioned humanoids a couple times. Really what our team does is we really try to help those folks understand exactly what we're talking about today, which is you got this idea and you think about really some of the most trite components that might want to go into some of these really cool products, spring connectors and things like that. And engineers are like, well, where do we get that done? How do we get low rate introductory production done? And we really try to be that first stop on that new product introduction journey before it gets into, again, some of the Jables and the Flexes and some of those folks. So that's really what we do here at Fathom.
And the one thing we look at manufacturing today, when many companies are looking at driving manufacturing back here locally for reshoring, or companies who are trying to create new innovation, time to market is a very big thing. When companies want to go out there, a lot of times to win, you have to be first. And in many cases, so we're going out there, and you do a lot with medical. You do a lot with defense and aerospace and some other stuff that I've seen when touring your facilities in Wisconsin and down in Texas. Why? We're approaching high value products, ones that have a lot of specific machinery or additive manufacturing or subtractive manufacturing. What are some of the key things that companies need to be aware of when they're deploying and developing new products? Like what are the challenges that I think companies are missing the most?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this interplay, right? One is cost and quality, right? And then you get this volume as another input to the equation. And you have to understand that there is a progression through that. And so I think some of the companies, what they're doing is that they're either not considering what it looks like to get to rate production. And I'll give you maybe a specific example. Some people really want to only focus on additive manufacturing. And if their product gets to volume and needs to get to cost targets, that maybe you can move it down the food chain so that it's not just something that industry can afford, but maybe consumers. You may need to think about in the future migrating it out of polymer additive into injection molding. Yeah. And that's some of the journey, especially for startup companies, that we try to help them to understand is that it's going to cost a little bit more here, but, and this is maybe one of the more important things for them, is you can iterate really quickly. If you go back 20 years, Jake, to iterate on a design took weeks, if not months. And now with additive manufacturing and all that digital stuff I mentioned at the beginning, you can get things like grippers for a humanoid robot that, you're boxing with. You can do that in hours and days. And that speed to market is so imperative. But then when you talk about medical, you mentioned that, or A&D, now what you also have to think about, and those folks are pretty good at it, by the way, fortunately, is, how do you do that in a secure and safe manner and get the products that, you can use them to do what you want to do with.
So I look at, you guys have 7 manufacturing facilities. One of the biggest things, and this kind of dives into what you said a little bit, the number of different manufacturing processes and equipment on a production floor is, you guys have a lot of them, and you're covering everything from additive to subtractive to EDM to fiberglass. It really was a full board. How do companies do a better job of becoming aware of what technology is available to them to make products these days? I think, when you're going out there and companies want to make this new idea, they are only thinking about additive manufacturing because that's kind of the hype these days, right? I have a 3D printer behind me. There's 33 million additive manufacturing and 3D printers in households in the US today. Where do we help begin to educate what that change looks like for both big companies, I guess, who've always done it a certain way, right? A lot of times it took a long time for people to get over this fear that additive was only for prototyping, not for production. Versus, I know when we were out there and looking at some medical products that you had, the only way you could make that product was through additive. Versus the opposite end of the spectrum. How do we get people who only think of additive as a solution to move them into that production? Like, what's that change management ideology that companies need to do things differently to become successful?
Yeah, it's an amazing question, and I know you're a Lego guy, but I'm not going to quite go back to our kids and getting all the kids started on Lego. But what I will tell you is it starts long before we even start talking about our company or others, and it's really the education system, frankly. What we do talk about quite a bit at Fathom is how do we make people, and you said it, aware that you just don't have to go tool and die, or you don't just have to go injection molding. Because if you think back to engineering school a long time ago for me, there weren't playbooks for additive.
Yeah.
There still really aren't. It's a lot of experiential learning. And, so right now that's one of the big questions. How do we get more people to even think about designing with some of these newer technologies, but also, and this is really important back to change management, how do you get them to do it in a place that they are confident that that design effort and what they're investing into in the labs will result in a product that will hold up, when it actually goes out to market. So what I would tell you is, for us, what we can do is we can do a lot more education as companies with people in the trades, people in university, even high school. But it starts a lot further before they come and work for a company like ours.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight. So when we look at the accessibility to for I guess the accessibility to companies to reach out to find companies who manufacture products these days, why do we see contract manufacturing getting more of a norm than before? I feel for a long time,
Yeah.
many companies always try to produce in-house as much as possible. But I think contract manufacturing has become more of an entire business strategy rather than just either a we'll start here and then we'll move internally,
Yeah.
or why is that changing today? Why is this industry taking off so much?
Yeah, I mean, again, I won't try to go back to too much of the history, but if you think about contract manufacturing and its origins, it's when they were able to buy equipment that maybe some of the smaller companies couldn't afford. You think a lot of the stuff for circuit boards and things of that nature, and they could basically lease out fractional capacity on that high cost equipment. And so that's kind of how Summit was born in the electronics industry. But really, it's a natural progression, Jake. It's if you've got a company like 3M, there's stuff ways up the road. You think about them; they innovate. They make new back in the day Post-its. That's what that company does amazingly well, and they were forced to manufacture because nobody else did. Well, now you have an ecosystem of people who can do the glue on that, the color and the paper and everything else, and it really starts to let people specialize, and it makes the industry move faster, makes more products available to consumers. The other thing I would also say is that globalization, back to digital, now you can actually take a part of a manufacturing process and assembly, move it somewhere it's either closer to natural resources or the labor pool is more appropriate for it. And globalization drove it as well. And that's really what contract manufacturing grew up around.
Yeah. So when you look at quality as a big thing, I think a lot of times people always want to make sure, hey, we're going online, if we're ordering these parts. At what point would you say the products that we're developing stops being like where quality stops being like an operational metric and moves into the competitive like differentiator? Does that make sense? Like what I'm trying to get with that. Where do we
Uh,
move from? Hey, this is just a selling point to this is what makes us the stand apart.
yeah, no, I mean, quality has to be in everything you do. I mean, I fly a lot. I want to make sure that the airplanes that I'm flying in are still built with some degree of quality. But you've got to start that earlier in the design process, because if you think about Boeing back in the day, they had weeks, months, and years to do testing and everything else. And you think a lot of the product cycle now, and it's days and weeks. And so quality has to start at design. It starts in prototyping. A lot of the consultation that our team does, and I think they do it exceptionally well, by the way, is they talk about, okay, you can put 100 constraints on this in the drawings to get to that outcome, but it's going to cost you. What do you really need? And so those conversations are taking place, in, I think, a lot earlier. And again, because there's digital representations of what you're trying to do with the assemblies, but quality has to permeate all the way through. And I just think it's actually moving further up the ideation channel than it has ever in the past.
So let's dive into a case study, a success story. You don't have to drop the name, and I'm kind of throwing this one on you as well. Walk us through a client, where they start with you, what that entire process looks like. Is there any fun success stories that come to mind when a company has worked with like Fathom in the past that people, might recognize that product, recognize the brand?
Yeah.
What's a fun story to kind of give a better understanding of high value production on the manufacturing floor?
Yeah, let me try to be careful. But let's think about maybe diagnostic equipment that you might see in a hospital, right? That maybe you're pumping blood through or doing something else. One of the really exciting parts of additive manufacturing is its ability to make things that you can't traditionally, and fluidics and how things flow that you can't do with either CNC and injection molding. And so we've had opportunities where we've gotten to get really early in what people are trying to accomplish and how they're trying to move some of these fluids through. And start to unlock how you do it with additive manufacturing. Now, in that particular instance, we didn't have the materials in additive manufacturing that could ultimately represent the final product, but to do some of the testing on what they were trying to accomplish in that diagnostic equipment early days, they got to move really quick, see the changes, see the characteristics, and then you can help them off ramp and say, okay, if this is ultimately going to go where it did, which is a hybrid of injection molding and then some CNC, they got so many iteration cycles. And so it's just really fun to see that. And, ultimately the product is out there making people's lives better. And, those things are super rewarding, Jake.
Well, I think that was really interesting where the whole entire process wasn't the final product, but it really helped with that PLM, that product lifecycle management, of getting from where they wanted to go up to a final rendition of then being able to pull the trigger around those final designs. And I think a lot of times we get stuck in, design purgatory where we're trying to design the final product so early in the phase rather than concepting out the design and the flow and the system within that we don't move fast enough.
And I'll tell you what. So now on the other end of the spectrum, if you think about the DoD and what they're trying to do for the warfighters, it's days of improvement. I mean, if you think about all the drone market right now, I don't want to talk too much about the warfighting, but the clock speed on innovation and development to protect our soldiers. But you have to do it with product that's rugged and safe. But make no mistake, they want to go faster in their LRIP, in getting to initial production. So not only are they testing things, but they're out there supporting people in a fast moving market. Speed and quality. Speed and quality for both those markets.
So final question as we wrap things up. If we were to look out, I typically say 10 years, but the industry moves so fast where like 10 years just seems a lifetime away. So let's just say like in the next 3 to 5 years, what new capabilities, what processes are going to separate manufacturers in these markets? Like what's going to make it where companies really begin to take that leadership role or the competitive advantage when they're out there developing product for companies? What's going to be the biggest differentiator? Is it going to be the adoption of AI? Do you think the low cost labor of humanoid robotics? Is it going to be the digitalization of assets? Is it going to be better insights and data into your production floor and knowing when all your equipment's having max utilization? What's that differentiator that you think is going to be?
Well, I think it's going to be nuggets of a number of the things. I think, unfortunately, and not just because of paying homage to my friends at Fanuc, but I don't know that humanoids are going to get there quite as quick as maybe the market thinks today. But Jake, it's going to be the same thing that we saw coming out of Silicon Valley, efficiencies in the front office, except now we're going to see, and AI is going to be a huge component of it. I mean, it already is. It's really going to start knocking down a lot of the mundane tasks. You've been through our facilities. You see what it takes for us to set up machines, make sure that code is appropriate to put on a CNC. There's a lot of work there that isn't taking advantage of the creative people that are excited to come in and work with us. But back to your question of, what are the big wins going to be? I think it's going to be recognition that you've got to very safely and securely be willing to move your designs through a complex supply chain. And we fancy ourselves really good at the front end. There's folks that are good at the back end, but you've got to get your data, your plans, and using AI, everything ready to move through that, at increasingly fast pace. And those are going to be the winners. It's going to be about speed.
About speed. I love it. And I think, I know one more question with that, but like speed is a big thing, right? And I think that's one of the biggest things we've seen in the last 5 years is shifts in supply chains.
That's right.
And I think when we see, and we kind of talked about it earlier on, but the shift in supply chain with more manufacturing here, with more companies driving manufacturing here, that's going to be one of the biggest competitive advantage is having more control and more visual accessibility into what's happening at each segment of your supply chain, and not just what's happening on your production floor, but where the components that you're getting, that you're either assembling or going into your processes, are coming from, and visualization and accessibility. That I think is one of those things that's going to be changing the manufacturing floor a lot.
Absolutely. I mean, the last century, what we've seen is that, you don't have to buy one form of a Model T. Now you can buy, cars with colors you like. That customization for the consumer is going to continue to take place. And ultimately for manufacturing, what the supply chain is enabling you to do is to get to the cost curves in lower batch sizes and faster. And so all those things are going to factor in. It's an exciting time. And, for anybody that I talk to, I'm like, it is a great time to get in manufacturing. It really is.
It is awesome. Well, Rush, I really appreciate your time. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And of course, if people want to learn more and connect with you, what's a good place to connect to you? On LinkedIn, what do you recommend?
Absolutely. Please look me up on LinkedIn. More importantly, love for you to come and take a look at Fathom's website and see what 500 really talented folks are doing to help with that NPI cycle.
Awesome. Well, Rush, really appreciate your time. And of course, everyone who is watching, really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to watch a conversation with Rush LaSelle. Until then, we'll see you guys on the next Wrench Factor.